I'll pay your debts if you'll marry me. A cold proposition, delivered as Naomi knelt before the barren land still heavy with debt. Naomi, the Black Widow, clutched the bank notice, its stark words declaring the ranch would be seized within 30 days. By the fresh mound of earth where grass had yet to grow, her husband's last vow still echoed in her heart. Keep this ranch, no matter what. But to promise and to keep are two different things. She stood alone against parched soil, cattle wasting away, and a town indifferent to the color of her skin. Now, as a figure from the past returns, her late husband's closest friend who once vanished, he brings with him a letter from the grave, revealing a debt that binds past and present. The air thickens with rumor, with watchful eyes, and with a storm of law closing in. Naomi faces a choice: surrender the ranch or surrender her heart. And sometimes, losing land is only the beginning, for losing yourself is the truest tragedy of all. Dust Creek, Wyoming, 1876. The sky hung heavy, gray as lead, as if ready to collapse upon every rotting rooftop in the valley. Wind carried red dust from the south, shrieking through broken fences and lashing against the weathered boards of the Carter Ranch. From a distance, the place looked less like a home and more like a body in its last breaths, waiting for the final hand of dirt to cover it. Naomi Carter sat on the porch steps, calloused hands trembling as they clutched a paper marked with a crimson stamp. The words of the bank were as cold and dry as the dust in the air. Notice of foreclosure. 30 days. Only 30 days more and the land Daniel, her husband, had bled for, sweated for, and turned with the whole of his life, would be dragged from her hands like an old horse hauled off to slaughter. Before her, the fields stretched wide, their grass stripped to brown-gray tatters by the wind, as barren as her own worn frame. A quiet sorrow etched itself into every line of her face. Her eyes, deep-set, dark as scorched earth, had lost the light they once held. Her hair, bound beneath a plain kerchief, spilled a few loose strands that whipped with the dust. In that moment, Naomi no longer heard the wind, nor saw the red storm thickening around the porch. She heard only the echo of a promise, the last one. That night, as Daniel gasped in the dim room lit by a single oil lamp, he had gripped her hand, rough and shaking, and whispered, "Naomi, keep the ranch, no matter what." She had nodded, choking back grief as her eyes brimmed over. Daniel had closed his own, a faint smile on his lips, as if believing her promise alone was enough to hold the land. Now, staring at the words 30 days, Naomi no longer felt it as a beacon. It was a rope cinched tight at her throat, a curse dangling overhead. Across the yard, the fresh mound of earth had yet to sprout grass. The soil was dark, scattered with weeds, still streaked with last month's rain. Naomi's eyes fixed upon it, dry and hollow, her chest rising with a nameless ache. That morning, Naomi had risen before dawn, stoking the fire, pouring water into a pot of cornmeal. Breakfast was thin porridge and the last drizzle of honey left in a clay jar. Elijah, her eldest at 12, with hands already roughened, pulled on his father's boots and went out to check the fences. Sarah, just 9, her curls braided in haste, sat at the table and quietly slid part of her portion toward her younger brother. Naomi saw it all but said nothing. Her throat locked. She bit her lip until it bled, holding back tears. Everything stood against them. Barren soil, cattle wasted from the hard winter, the loan Daniel had taken for seed last year, now a snare tightening round their necks. The bank had no patience left, and Dust Creek had never spared kindness for a black widow. The other day, when Naomi carried baskets of eggs to market, strange stares followed each of her steps. No one spat insults aloud, but the eyes were heavier than words. Some whispered she wouldn't last past harvest. Some wagered in the saloon that the Carter Ranch would be sold cheap to some wealthy white man before the snows returned. Naomi had grown used to such things since the day she followed Daniel here. But used did not mean easy. Every trip through town felt like brushing against an invisible barbed fence, keeping her on one side, them on the other. Now, with Daniel gone, that fence seemed to close in tighter than ever. She rose and stepped into the yard. Her old boots sank into red earth littered with stone. The sky pressed low, clouds like sodden blankets weighing the horizon. For a breath, she thought she saw Daniel there, tall frame, the limp from that horse's kick, hand lifted in greeting. But the wind blew hard, dust veiled her vision, and the space stood empty. Naomi knelt at the grave, her hand smoothing the rough wood of the cross, carved with the name, Daniel Carter, 1839 to 1876. She pressed her forehead against it and whispered, "I promised, but I don't know how to keep it, Daniel." Her voice broke into the wind. Only the fields, the dead trees, and the heavy sky answered with silence. Inside her chest, two forces warred, the promise like a dwindling flame, and the cold reality snuffing it out. She knew, if no miracle came, the ranch would be gone, the children would scatter, and the vow made at her husband's grave would fester as a wound for the rest of her life. Naomi seized a fistful of dirt from the mound. The wind tore at her kerchief, flinging loose strands and a few tears into the red dust. She did not yet know that in only a few days, a figure from the past would return, bringing with him both an old debt and a new promise. The sound of hooves came first, as a faint thrum upon the dry ground. Yet in the stillness of the afternoon, each beat struck like a drum inside Naomi's chest. She lifted her eyes from the foreclosure notice, weary gaze turning toward the red dust road. There, a man rode nearer, his tall frame etched against the dim sky. A shiver passed through her. For over half a year, the porch had known only the tread of debt collectors, land barons scheming for a bargain, or strangers stopping for water. But this man was not like them. His posture was upright, his horse strong, his boots polished though dust-streaked. He sat as though the miles and the sandstorms had molded the saddle into part of himself. He reined in at the gate, where broken boards leaned near collapse. Naomi rose, heart stumbling as the wind lashed at her hair. The man dismounted slowly, removed his hat, and revealed a weather-worn face carved by years. She knew him at once, though it had been many seasons. Caleb. The name escaped her lips, half surprise, half tremor. Caleb Dawson, the closest friend Daniel ever had, the man who had drunk whiskey with her husband on this very porch, who had been dragged from barroom fights by Daniel's strong grip, who had once been lent a large sum when ruin left him bare-handed. Then, one day, Caleb had vanished without a trace. Naomi had long believed him dead on some border trail, or swallowed into the lawless drift of a wanderer's life. Yet now, he stood at her gate, alive, solid, and cloaked in mystery. Naomi stepped closer. Why are you here?" Caleb did not answer at once. He bent, unfastened a worn leather pouch from his saddle, and drew out a weathered envelope, its edges yellowed, its dust-smeared surface still bearing a hand she recognized. He held it out to her, voice graveled by wind and road. "I came back because of a promise." Naomi's hands shook as she took it. The letter was written in Daniel's bold script. She knew every line of it, every curling stroke of his D. Her heart twisted tight. She opened it, eyes racing the words. Daniel had written, "If the day comes when I am gone, Caleb, return to Dust Creek. Look after Naomi, not only as a sister, but as a wife, as everything I once held. Do not let her fight alone." Naomi froze. Tears brimmed but did not fall. Daniel had foreseen the frailty of his own breath, the sickness in his lungs. He had left his will not to her, but entrusted to the friend who owed him more than life itself. She lifted her gaze to Caleb. His eyes did not flinch, though guilt shadowed deep within them. "I wasn't there when Daniel needed me," Caleb said low. "I've owed him a lifetime. I'm here to pay it back." Naomi clutched the letter, her soul in turmoil. Part of her ached with the grief of memory. Another burned with fury. Why had Daniel bound her to this, thrust another man into her life as though it were inevitable? Yet amid the storm inside, a fragile flicker stirred. Caleb was not like the others who came to claim what remained. He came with a letter, with proof of loyalty and a vow. And in his eyes, Naomi saw something raw. Not pity, not greed, but a kind of solemn duty, heavy as sorrow. The wind rose, whipping red dust in circles around the yard. Naomi turned, her voice sharp as steel. "You say you came back for a promise, but I don't need charity. This ranch is Daniel's and mine. If you mean to take it—" Caleb cut in, firm yet gentle. "No, Naomi, I didn't come to take. I came to help you keep it. And if it takes standing beside you as a husband to do it, then I will." The words fell heavy, like iron. Naomi clutched the edge of her shawl, heart pounding hard. The thought of marriage again, mere months after laying her husband in the ground, sliced at her pride like a knife. Yet the echo of Daniel's last plea cut deeper still. Keep the ranch, no matter what. She gave no reply, only turned, stepping inside the old wooden house, the door creaking shut behind her. But even as the shadows claimed the room, another hinge whispered open. Caleb had followed, his dust-worn boots pressing upon the floor without invitation. The space thickened, filled only by the wind sighing through the cracks and the foreclosure notice upon the table, sharp as a blade suspended above them both. Naomi stood still, her hand upon the worn wood, her heart tangled in anger, confusion, and the faintest spark of hope she dared not name. Caleb stood in the small parlor, the oil lamp flickering across a face hardened by years of wandering. His long coat carried the dust of the trail, but his eyes burned steady, part resolve, part torment. Naomi sat rigid in the wooden chair beside the table, her hands clenched white together. The foreclosure notice still lay between them, a silent third presence, witness to a bargain between fate and a widow's pride. Caleb placed a small leather pouch on the table. The weighty clink of metal rang out. Gold, the kind that made every bank in the territory bow. He spoke slowly, as if each word had been measured long before. "I have enough to pay it all. Tomorrow, Naomi. The bank will hold no claim on this land. But there is one condition." He paused, meeting her gaze without flinching. Naomi's throat turned dry. She knew this condition would not be mere charity for Daniel's sake. No man carried a fortune to do good with no return. Caleb's voice dropped lower. You must marry me, not because I would claim you, but because it was Daniel's wish. The room froze. Naomi heard the thunder of her own heart. His words cut through the fragile shell she had built since Daniel's death. Mary? Caleb, the friend who once shared Daniel's meager bread, who had sat under this roof in the days of want. The thought burned her with both outrage and grief. Tears swelled, but she forced them back, her voice cold as steel. And what do you call this? Loyalty to a friend? Or a way to own me under the name of promise? Daniel never meant for me to be bound. Caleb did not flinch beneath her fury. He stood tall, broad shoulders filling the room, eyes shadowed with guilt he did not hide. Naomi, I will not force you, but Daniel saved my life more than once. He gave me a chance when the world had turned its back. I owe him everything, and if I let you lose this ranch, I could never face him again, even in dreams. Naomi turned away, clutching the notice so tightly it nearly tore. Her soul spun. Part of her wanted to scream and cast him out, yet another part knew Caleb was the only hand offering a lifeline above the rising tide of debt. Outside, the wind howled across the barren fields, rattling loose sheets of tin. Inside, silence pressed heavy, broken only by their unsteady breaths. At last, Naomi whispered, You think I can step into Daniel's place so easily? I am not a debt to be handed off. I was his wife, and the rest of me lies buried beneath that soil with him. Caleb shut his eyes a moment, then opened them, no longer cold, but tempered with patience. I do not ask for love, Naomi, only to keep this ranch with you. We can begin as an arrangement, and let time decide the rest. The words struck deep. Her grief for Daniel was still raw, her loss still bleeding. To live beside another man, his friend no less, felt like betrayal, an insult to her own fidelity. Yet the truth was merciless. In 30 days, without gold, the land would be gone. Naomi rose sharply, her dark dress brushing the floorboards. Give me time, she said, voice trembling yet firm. This is no decision made in a night. Caleb nodded, placed his hat upon his head, and lifted the pouch once more. As he turned toward the door, his eyes lingered on hers, quiet, but carrying a trace of hope. I'll remain in town a few days. When you're ready, give me your answer. The wooden door shut behind him, leaving Naomi in a room heavy with shadows. She sank back into the chair, clutching Daniel's letter tight. Her husband's vow and Caleb's proposal coiled around her mind, one an untouchable memory, the other a merciless present. Outside, the moon climbed pale over Daniel's grave. Naomi lifted her gaze through the window, whispering within, Daniel, how do I keep both the promise and myself? That night, sleep fled from her. Only the wind and an unending question circled her mind, a question no dawn was certain to answer. Naomi did not sleep that night. The oil lamp sputtered, throwing her shadow long and warped against the wall, like her own soul tangled and restless. Outside, the prairie wind rattled the tin roof, each strike a grim reminder that every day slipping past drew her nearer to foreclosure. She sat at the old wooden table, debt papers spread before her. The blotched black ink seemed like bruises stamped across a life already worn thin. Her fingers brushed the silver band on her ring finger, the last relic of Daniel. In her mind echoed Caleb's words from the evening. I'll save the ranch, but you must marry me." The thought cut deep. Marriage, sacred, once shared only with Daniel, now laid bare like a transaction. Yet alongside the anger was a strange pang of pity. Caleb had not spoken like a man eager to profit, but like one burdened by sorrow. Naomi knew the truth. If she refused, the ranch would vanish, and Daniel's last vow would die with it. But if she agreed, she would be branded forever, a black widow who sold herself for land. Hours later, she stepped onto the porch, night air heavy with the scent of dry grass and old smoke. Stars glimmered above. Somewhere within, she recalled how Daniel had once trusted Caleb. If her husband had left that letter, perhaps he had seen a loyalty in his old friend that she now struggled to see. At dawn, Caleb returned. He stood at the door, dark eyes steady with expectation. Naomi opened it, her voice hoarse but resolute. "I'll agree, but only on 3 conditions." Caleb frowned slightly, but listened. Naomi spoke slowly, each condition carved into the cold morning air. "First, when I die, I am to be buried beside Daniel. That will not be denied." Caleb nodded without hesitation. "Second, this ranch remains under my hand. You may help, but every decision is mine." A flicker of surprise crossed his eyes. Then he answered, "Agreed." "Third, if we cannot find peace together, you will leave me enough to begin again. You will not leave me empty-handed." This time Caleb was silent for long moments. He touched the brim of his hat, gaze stretching over the prairie. At last he nodded, low and solemn. "I give you my word." Naomi gripped her shawl. His brief reply fell like a judgment already sealed. The wedding was swift, stripped of romance. No white dress, no music. Only the small courthouse room, the smell of ink and paper drowning any sense of ceremony. The old judge read the vows in a flat voice and signed the register. Naomi and Caleb became husband and wife without rings, without flowers, only under the watch of a few townsfolk who happened by. The news spread quick. In the Dry Creek saloon, whispers flew. The Black Widow sold herself for the ranch. Dawson's after land more than love. Marriage is just business these days. Naomi heard such words at the mercantile, buying salt. They did not lower their voices, as though she had no right to walk among them. She held her head high, eyes unflinching. But when she returned to the empty kitchen of the ranch, her shoulders collapsed beneath the weight. Caleb stayed from that day on. He spoke little, instead mending fences, watering horses, cutting weeds. Naomi noticed the force in every strike of his hoe, the heaviness in each step, like a man working off a penance. At night, they shared silent suppers. Naomi prepared bean stew. Caleb only nodded his thanks. The lamp cast their shadows across the table, 2 strangers bound by paper, learning how to live side by side. Naomi still wore Daniel's silver ring. Caleb's eyes fell upon it once, darkening with something unspoken, before he looked away. The silence between them grew dense, charged like a storm unspent. Days later, the truth of Caleb's words came through. He carried a leather pouch full of gold, the very money he swore would pay the debt. And within days, the foreclosure was revoked. Naomi stood at the table, tears brimming as she read the bold red stamp, postponed. She turned to Caleb, lips parting with gratitude. But he only shook his head, voice low. This was for Daniel, nothing more. Naomi understood, yet something twisted inside her. He was holding to the letter of his promise, but his coldness made her feel like no more than part of a bargain. A marriage without love, built on duty alone. In town, the rumors didn't stop. Some said Caleb had made his fortune once from Daniel's loan. Others claimed he'd returned not for a vow, but to seize the ranch. The gossip clung to Naomi like thorns each time she passed the market. What steadied her were the three conditions. They were her shield, a fragile one, but proof she had not surrendered all control. Yet she also sensed something deeper in Caleb, something unsaid. His eyes lingered on the graveyard, where Daniel lay, heavy with regret that no silence could hide. Naomi pressed her hand against her chest, startled by the strength of her own heartbeat. The three conditions had secured a semblance of peace, but they had also opened a door, one neither she nor Caleb could yet see through, a door leading into a life neither of them had ever imagined. Caleb moved into the ranch on a cold morning, when frost still clung thick to the dry grass. Naomi watched his old wooden valise set down by the door, her chest heavy as stone. Everything had happened too quickly, from the nod that sealed her agreement to the hasty courthouse wedding, and now a man nearly a stranger stepping into the space that had once belonged only to her family. Their first meal under the same roof was steeped in silence. Naomi laid out cornbread, salted meat, and dried greens, the meager fare of lean years. Caleb sat across from her, his tall frame making the old chair groan. He tried at conversation, asking small questions about the land and the harvest, but each word felt clumsy, none falling naturally. Naomi answered briefly, voice measured, keeping her distance. In the lamplight, their shadows stretched upon the wall, two separate figures forced to share a table, their spirits far apart. That night, Naomi lay in the old wooden bed, her back turned. Caleb spread a blanket on the floor. His steady, weary breaths brought back Daniel's memory, and with it, a hollow ache. The man who had vowed to shield her all her life was gone. At dawn, Naomi started when she saw Caleb already outside. He wore a rough shirt beneath a thick coat, standing with his black horse. Before she could ask, he said, "Ride the fence with me. If we're to keep this place, we need to know where it's weak." She was surprised. Few would have thought the man who'd vanished from town years ago could speak with such certainty about running a ranch. Yet Caleb's tone carried no awkwardness, his eyes steady where they had faltered the night before. They rode the dusty road together, hoofbeats thudding beneath a gray sky. Naomi showed him where spring rains had rotted posts and left the fence sagging. Caleb dismounted, his calloused hands quick and sure as he set fresh boards. Naomi stood back, startled by how practiced he was at toil. By the eastern creek, where Daniel had often sat with his fishing pole, Naomi went still. Caleb planted another stake, then looked up and caught the sorrow in her eyes. He said nothing, only gave a small nod, as if to say he understood and would not trespass upon her grief. Naomi's chest tightened, stung yet strangely relieved that he offered no hollow comfort. At noon, they rested beneath a birch. Caleb pulled a hard biscuit from his pocket and held it out. Naomi looked at his hand, rough, sunburnt, and accepted, eating quietly. Neither spoke of the future, nor of the wedding. Yet Naomi realized, for the first time in months, she was not walking the broken fence line alone. By afternoon, they returned to the ranch. Caleb had already stabled the horse. The tack hung neat and orderly. He had not asked permission, nor waited for orders, but moved as if the work was simply his. Naomi hesitated, ready to object, but said nothing. Perhaps the ranch truly did need another pair of hands. That evening, supper was less strained. Caleb spoke of the years wandering, the heavy work in Denver, the silver mines in Nevada, the times he'd been cheated and forced to labor off his debts. Naomi listened, half believing, yet she heard the weariness in his tone. When Daniel's name arose, Caleb went quiet, then murmured only, "He pulled me out of the mud. Now it's my turn." Naomi gave no reply. Gratitude warred with fear. How long could a marriage built on duty alone endure? Later, under the prairie moon, Naomi stepped onto the porch, shawl around her shoulders. Caleb sat on the steps, sharpening a knife. Silver light traced his weathered face. She found herself asking, "You truly mean to stay?" He looked up, fire in his eyes. "I promised, and I won't run again." The words hung between them, heavy in the night. They sat only steps apart, yet the distance in their hearts stretched wide as the prairie beyond. The first day as husband and wife ended not with closeness, nor with affection, but with the faintest sharing of burden. Still, beneath the red dust, something unseen had begun to stir. Naomi did not yet know it, but Caleb's footsteps on the ranch were no longer those of a guest. They had started to leave a mark, a new trace in the journey of a woman who had sworn to keep her promise at her husband's grave. Night, in Dust Creek, carried a silence unlike any other. After long hours riding the fields, patching broken fence lines, and counting the thin cattle back into their stalls, Naomi often sat alone in the small kitchen, listening to the wind whisper through the cracks in the boards. The wind here was not gentle, not like the breezes of the eastern plains. It carried dust, thirst, and the power to scatter whatever secrets a soul tried to bury. Caleb had taken the small room beside the kitchen, the room Daniel once used after long drives with the herd. Naomi could not shake the unease that seized her each time she passed the door, hearing Caleb's boots unlaced, the saddle set aside, his sighs falling like a man who had at last found shelter. Still, they were strangers bound by a cold contract, nothing more. One night, after Naomi had finished cleaning, she noticed the lamp burning inside his room long past midnight. Curiosity pulled her closer. Through the narrow crack, she saw Caleb bent over the table, pen flying across a worn leather journal. He did not look like the rough drifters who haunted saloons. The way he held the pen, the heaviness in his eyes, spoke of something private, burdened. Naomi turned quickly, ashamed of her own watching, yet unsettled. This man, who had returned with Daniel's letter, who had saved the ranch through a strange bargain of marriage, was now writing into the night as if guarding some truth too heavy to speak. The next evening, the chance came. Caleb lingered out by the barn, and the leather-bound journal lay waiting upon the table, the lamp still lit. Naomi's hands trembled as she touched the cover. Inside, his hand leaned hard upon the page, dark and hurried. The first line she saw struck her cold. "Naomi is stronger than Daniel ever believed. But will she forgive when she learns the whole truth?" Her breath caught. Her heart pounded, not from fear alone, but from a new, raw wound she could not name. What truth? Forgive what? And why did Caleb speak of her and Daniel as if still bound in some hidden conversation she had never been allowed to join? At the sound of boots on the porch, Naomi snapped the book shut and fled back to the sink. Caleb entered, laid his hat on the peg, and his eyes flicked once toward the table. He said nothing, only pinched the flame, slipped the journal into his coat, and disappeared into his room. That night, Naomi did not sleep. Debts, vows, this marriage of necessity, all tangled like threads in a knot. And now the words in that book seeded suspicion in her chest. Was Caleb hiding something? Did it tie to Daniel, his death, or the real reason Caleb had come back to Dust Creek? By morning, the air between them had shifted, though neither spoke of it. Caleb still rose early to ride the pasture. Naomi still brewed coffee and laid out cornbread. Yet each glance held the weight of a wooden bridge too worn, ready to break with a single wrong step. Naomi began to notice. Caleb never left the journal behind. He carried it even out to the range. At night, when he bent once more to write, his face looked burdened, steadfast, like a man confessing to paper what he could not give to the air. Once, from the porch, she glimpsed him by the creek at dusk, reading over the pages. Sunlight fell across his shoulders like tired gold as he sat long, as if speaking to ghosts. Her doubts deepened. Daniel's vow had once been only hers, but now it was a chain binding her and Caleb together. Which part of the promise was he keeping? Saving the ranch, or concealing some truth Daniel had never told? Night fell again, and Naomi lay restless. She remembered Daniel's final days, the rough breath, the cold grip of his hand. He had spoken of Caleb, of friendship once strong, but never of why his friend had vanished from Dust Creek. Now the missing pieces seemed to lie in the hands of a widow left alone. Naomi brushed her fingers against the debt notice still pinned to the shelf, then turned to the black fields outside. If Caleb held a secret, she would uncover it. Not only for herself, but for her children and the ranch. For Daniel's promise was no longer hers alone. It had become a cord that bound a widow and a mysterious man into a fate neither had chosen. That evening, the sky over Dust Creek broke into a shattered gold, as if the sun itself were falling behind the ridges. Naomi stood by the fence, her hand brushing the weathered grain worn pale by wind and sand. Caleb walked up from the barn, his stride no longer the awkward presence of a newcomer, yet in Naomi's eyes, still carrying a distance she could not name. He stopped, pulled off his dusty gloves, his gaze dropping as though fighting a storm inside himself. Naomi was used to his silences, but tonight it weighed heavier than before. "Naomi," Caleb began, voice rough, as if dragged through his chest. "There's something I have to tell you. Perhaps I should have kept it buried, but that would be a lie, and I'm done living in silence." Naomi turned, her dark eyes steady beneath her black kerchief. Caleb drew a long breath. "Years ago, when you first came as Daniel's wife, I loved you. That love burned quiet inside me, never more than a glance. Daniel was my friend. More than that, he saved my life, gave me reason when I had none. I could never betray that trust. So, I left Dust Creek. I left to kill the fire in me." The confession fell heavy, like stone tumbling down a cliff. Naomi froze, her hand upon the fence as cold as winter timber. In her memory, Caleb had always been only a shadow in Daniel's stories, a tall figure from a past she could never place. Now the missing piece was filled, but her heart twisted with pain. "Why tell me this?" she whispered, voice cracked and dry. Caleb closed his eyes, shook his head. "Not for pity, not to wedge myself into what you and Daniel had, only so you'd know. What I do now isn't only for a promise. A part of me has belonged to you for a long time." but I know you may never forgive me for hiding it. Naomi stepped back, her eyes drawn to the wide, endless fields. Doubt swelled within her. Had all of this been arranged? From Daniel's letter to Caleb's return? And this love, was it salvation or another burden? That night, in the small kitchen, Naomi prepared supper in silence. The sound of knife on wood, the hiss of fire in the stove, each masked the storm inside her. Caleb sat across, calloused hands clasped, but said no more. They ate without words, only the lamp's sway casting their shadows as two strangers beneath one roof. When Naomi stepped onto the porch, the night wind cut through the prairie, carrying dry grass and road dust. She remembered Daniel, nights when he strummed a guitar and sang low to her. The memory now dragged at her like an anchor, filling her with gratitude and sorrow. And Caleb, he had confessed what he once buried. Naomi could not deny the stir in her chest at his words, yet just as strong rose the sense of betraying Daniel, as though her marriage's memory had been scored with a knife. She wondered, had Daniel known? Was his letter not only a request, but a tether binding her to Caleb? The thought chilled her blood. Meanwhile, Caleb sat in his room, opening the leather journal. His hand trembled as he wrote, "Today I spoke the truth. Perhaps she will hate me. But silence any longer is betrayal of myself. Daniel, forgive me." He closed the book, doused the lamp, but his eyes stayed wide in the dark. Naomi tossed through the night, Daniel's image and Caleb's confession alternating in her mind. She remembered the last embrace at the grave, the broken whisper of farewell. And now, to hear the same rough voice speak of love from another man. By dawn, when the wild roosters cried, Naomi rose with a hollow face. She knew life was no longer only debts, conditions, or a vow to guard the ranch. Between her and Caleb now lay a new fracture, dangerous, irresistible. Outside, Caleb saddled the horse early. Naomi stepped out. Their eyes met. In that instant, there was more than duty or promise, something deeper, unnamed. She turned away, clutching her shawl tight. Under her breath, only for herself, she whispered, "Daniel, what have you placed me into?" And so the secret of old affection no longer lingered in shadow. It had surfaced, a smoldering flame inside the small house at Dust Creek, waiting either to burn all to ash or to light the path of their fate. The first wind of winter carried the damp scent of earth and rotting leaves when the rider came through the ranch gate. Naomi was bent over tying a bundle of hay when the sharp clatter of boots made her look up. A stranger in a heavy coat, eyes averted, handed her an envelope sealed in red wax. The mark of the Colorado court was stamped clear upon it. Before she could speak, he swung back into the saddle and rode away, leaving only a swirl of dust in the cold air. Naomi stood still, the paper trembling in her hands, a dark foreboding rising in her chest. When Caleb came from the cattle pens, clothes mud-stained, she handed it to him without a word. He wiped the sweat from his brow, opened it, and his blue eyes hardened. In an instant, his calm veneer cracked. His fingers whitened against the paper. They've called me to court," he said hoarsely. "They claim I was part of a land fraud in Colorado last year." Naomi felt the world drop away. Images rushed through her mind. Daniel's vow, the 3 conditions she had set, the solemn look on Caleb's face the day of their hurried marriage, all now teetered on the edge of ruin. In Dust Creek, news spread like fire through dry grass. Only yesterday, housewives had come to ask Naomi for milk. Now they whispered in clusters, "That ranch must be built on dirty money." At the saloon, men sneered. A black widow marrying a swindler, well matched. Naomi heard it all, each word cut into her pride, already worn thin by months of widowhood. She remembered Caleb's late-night writing, the cryptic words of truth and forgiveness. Now it seemed those fragments were falling into a darker picture. That evening, supper lay cold on the wooden table. Naomi set down her spoon, untouched. Caleb ate a few bites before lowering his fork, eyes fixed on nothing. "You'll explain?" Naomi's voice was calm, but edged in ice. Caleb lifted his gaze, heavy with pain. "I wasn't part of it, but my name was used. I once worked for a land baron in Colorado. He's accused of stealing Indian lands. I left before it all came crashing down, but my name appears in the records." Naomi was silent. His words did not douse the suspicion already rooted deep. She remembered the messenger's averted eyes, the cruel whispers in town. And within her rose a question she dared not voice. Was betrayal about to strike again? Days thickened with tension. Naomi still rose before dawn, still tended cattle and the neighbor children left in her care. Yet she carried the weight of unseen eyes, every whisper, swindler, greedy widow, clinging like shadows. Caleb worked twice as hard, as though labor itself could prove his innocence. He repaired fences, patched roofs, cleared snow. But the harder he worked in silence, the greater the distance she felt. One night, Naomi stood at the window, prairie snow glinting silver. Behind her, the scratch of Caleb's pen stirred memory of the words she had once glimpsed in his journal. Suspicion burned hotter, and she turned. Caleb looked up, caught her gaze. This time he did not hide the book. He closed it gently, resting his hand on the cover. "Naomi," he said, voice low, "I don't ask you to believe me now. Only give me time. I swear on Daniel's grave I have not betrayed you." The oath struck her heart, but trust already cracked could not be mended with words alone. She turned away, leaving him with the flickering lamp. The summons spread across town. Landowners came offering to buy the ranch for a pittance, claiming if Caleb lost the trial, its name would be ruined. Naomi bit back her fury and refused, though fear gnawed deep. The bank still loomed, and now this shadow threatened as well. When the court date came, Caleb saddled his horse for Colorado. Naomi stood silent on the porch, clutching her coat. She wanted to say something. "Be careful, I still hope," but the words stuck in her throat. Caleb stepped close, laid a warm hand upon her shoulder. "I will come back. No matter the cost. I'll keep Daniel's promise. And mine to you." Naomi gave a faint nod, but the storm within her raged. As his figure faded into the white horizon, she realized she was standing alone, once more. That night, Naomi opened Daniel's worn Bible. The page was frayed, the words faded. "The truth shall set you free." Tears fell, staining the ink. She whispered to herself, would the truth Caleb brought back free them, or tear everything apart? Naomi carefully opened the old wooden chest, stained by years, where Daniel had always kept his important papers. The drawer groaned, releasing the faint scent of aged paper and pine. She hadn't been looking for anything in particular, only tidying, trying to ease the heaviness after days of rumor swelling through town. But when her hand touched a yellowed envelope, its red wax seal faded, her heart leapt. The handwriting was unmistakable. To Naomi, if the day should come. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling as she broke it open. The paper was brittle, the ink blurred in places, yet the words stood clear. Daniel confessed a truth she had never imagined. During the drought years, to expand the ranch, he had taken part in a Colorado land scheme involving unlawful transfers. When exposure loomed, it was Caleb, his closest friend, who stepped forward to bear the blame, to keep Daniel's name untarnished, to spare Naomi and the children from carrying disgrace. Naomi's tears splashed across the page. She felt not only his guilt in the words, but also a trust entrusted to her. Daniel had believed Caleb strong enough to carry the stain, to shield Naomi from the storm. The letter ended like a last will. If I am gone, let Caleb hold it all. He is the only one I trust. Naomi folded the letter, sat frozen in silence. The tick of the wall clock grew sharp in the stillness. For weeks, she had tortured herself with doubt. Now the pieces slid into place. The weight in Caleb's eyes, his long nights with the journal, his silence under scorn. He was no swindler. He had carried Daniel's shame, so her husband might lie in honor. But another ache rose. Why had Caleb never told her? Why let her bear humiliation, the whispers of marrying a dishonored man? Perhaps the burden had sunk so deep in him he no longer knew how to defend himself. Naomi stepped onto the porch, gazing across the fields where Caleb labored at the fence. His tall frame, steady beneath the fading sun, moved with the resolute rhythm of a man who only knew how to work, not to explain. She recalled his journal, the rough line she had once glimpsed. Will she ever forgive when she knows? Now she understood. That night Naomi did not sleep. The letter lay beneath her pillow, smoldering like a coal. She pitied Caleb, resented him, and felt trapped in a knot of emotion. Daniel's memory, too, shifted. Her husband, whom she had loved deeply, revealed now as not flawless but human, a man who had faltered. It was Caleb who had stood in the gray between right and wrong to shield them all. The next day, gossip in town still flared. Yet Naomi walked into the mercantile with new calm. She bought salt, flour, endured the stares, for she now carried truth, and truth gave her strength. Justice was not in their mouths, it was in what she held. That evening Caleb returned late, shoulders dusted, his shirt soaked with sweat and pine. He sat, lifted the bowl of stew Naomi had set out, gave only a silent nod. Naomi watched him, letter heavy against her heart. She longed to set it before him, to force him to face it. But when she saw his weary eyes, she waited. Not yet. In the days that followed, Naomi studied him closely. He never spoke of Colorado, never argued against rumor. He simply worked, rebuilding fences, checking horses, tallying feed. The silence, once suspicious, now revealed itself as sacrifice. A man might lie in words, but not in hands scarred and fresh with labor. One evening Naomi unlocked the letter again, read it, then placed it into a small wooden box and turned the key. One day, she vowed, he will know he does not carry this alone. But I will speak when he trusts I will not turn away. Deep within her, a strange stirring grew, part pity, part fragile warmth. She began to see their bond as more than Daniel's command. It was born of truth, long hidden, now binding them both. That night, Naomi sat by the window, oil lamp dimmed, Dust Creek's sky wide with stars. The wind carried the scent of dry grass. She whispered, as if Daniel might still hear, "I know now, and I will choose my own path forward." That evening, the prairie wind carried with it the dry scent of dust and scorched grass. Inside the wooden house, the oil lamp cast a weary yellow glow against the ceiling, shadowing two figures seated across from each other. Naomi set her teacup down, her hand trembling, not from heat, but from the pounding of her heart, as the question she had long held back pressed to be spoken. She looked straight into Caleb's eyes. They did not flinch, yet they revealed nothing. Naomi's voice was low, steady, though she herself feared the answer. "Were you involved in that land scheme, Caleb? Are you the swindler they say you are?" Silence filled the room. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes like whispers from the earth itself. Caleb sat still for a long while, fingers tight around the worn leather journal, before letting out a slow breath. "I do not regret it," he said at last, voice deliberate. "Years ago, Daniel was in trouble. He panicked. He erred. And the scandal would have ruined the Whitmore name. I stepped forward in his place, not because I was a fool, but because I owed him everything. Once he saved me from starving, from losing all I had. That debt I repaid by bearing his guilt." Naomi froze, each word striking heavy against her heart. She had always thought Caleb was a hard, distant man, marrying her only out of duty to the dead. Yet this truth shook her to her core. She forced her voice steady. "Then all the town's whispers are lies? You chose silence, let them brand you as a criminal?" Caleb gave a thin smile, but sorrow weighed at the corners of his eyes. "Naomi, I've long grown used to suspicion in men's eyes. The only thing I have never regretted, never felt shame for, is my love for you. From the first moment I saw you in Dust Creek, I knew my heart would never belong anywhere else. But Daniel was my friend. I could not betray him. I would not claim you through selfishness." Naomi felt her heart torn in two currents: resentment at the shame she had endured, the bitter marriage forced by debt and rumor, yet admiration, too, for his sacrifice, for the truth Daniel himself had hidden, and for a love that had been rooted all along. She bowed her head, hiding her confusion. The lamplight turned her dark hair to a band of gold amid the night's gloom. Caleb watched her, his gaze softened with a tenderness long buried. "You say you love me," Naomi murmured with a bitter smile. "Yet our wedding had no flowers, no music, only cruel whispers in the street." Caleb did not answer at once. He rose and moved to the window, his frame swallowed by the vast night. "I do not ask forgiveness, Naomi, nor do I expect your love. I only ask that you know the truth, that I did not take you for pity, nor for land. I wanted to preserve the only piece of Daniel still untouched, you. But more than that, I wanted you to know my love has never been borrowed, never bartered." Naomi's chest tightened. She wanted to lash out, to deny him. Yet the raw honesty in his voice pressed against her like an immovable weight. That night, she lay restless. Outside, the insects sang their ceaseless song. She remembered Daniel's final days and the way Caleb had always looked at her, quiet, restrained, never daring a step closer. Now she thought of Daniel's letter, trembling with confession, and of Caleb's words that filled its gaps. Together, they painted a new picture. Daniel not as flawless saint, Caleb not as swindler, but men both flawed, bound by loyalty and sacrifice. Naomi's eyes drifted to the small table where Caleb's journal rested. She wondered how many more truths were locked between its pages, how many feelings he had never spoken. Her heart quickened, not from fear, but from a strange bewilderment. For the first time in months, the distance between them did not feel unbreakable. There was still a boundary, but it was beginning to crack. At dawn, Caleb rose as always, saddling his horse. But this time, Naomi stepped out beside him. They mounted and rode across the fields together. No words were spoken, yet something in the silence had changed. An unspoken admission, a fragile trust beginning to take root. Naomi knew life with Caleb would never be easy. But within her, suspicion and admiration had entwined, sprouting into something uncertain, something dangerous, something alive. And perhaps it was that very struggle that would shape whatever came next. The pounding of hooves came first, rolling heavy down the dry dirt road that led to the ranch gate. Naomi heard them before she saw them. The quiet afternoon, filled only with the sigh of wind through the grass and the faint chime of cowbells, hardened suddenly into something taut and foreboding. Stepping out onto the porch, she saw 3 horsemen riding in, their manner anything but friendly. At their head rode Preston Hale, banker of Dust Creek. He was no longer young, his hair peppered gray and cropped neat, his eyes a cold, arrogant steel. Naomi had seen that look before, on the day he signed Daniel's debt notice, an expression both contemptuous and satisfied. Behind him came 2 hired hands, long coats cloaking revolvers at their hips, their fingers idly brushing the grips as if to remind all present how quickly steel might be drawn. Caleb emerged from the barn, sweat darkening his temples after a day's labor. He stood tall, unflinching at the sight of Hale, though Naomi's heart beat ragged, her ears echoing with the gossip that had stalked her of late. The widow Naomi wed a swindler. Sooner or later, he'll drag that ranch into the mud. Preston reined in before the porch, pulled a sheaf of papers from his coat, and brandished them like scripture. His voice, smooth but stagnant as well water left too long, cut through the air. This here is a new mortgage, bearing Caleb Monroe's name. He's pledged this ranch as collateral for a loan. Naomi went still, the words striking like hammer blows. She turned to Caleb, searching his face for denial, for explanation, but his features were stone. "No, it can't be," she whispered, dread rising sharp within her. Preston nudged his horse half a step closer, gray eyes fixed on Caleb. "I didn't come to negotiate. I came to remind you. The note comes due in 30 days. Fail to pay, and the ranch is mine. And this time, no man alive will save it." Naomi's fingers clenched white against the porch rail, her mind flashing to Daniel, his late payments, the endless quarrels at night. Now the same storm threatened again. Only the man standing before her was Caleb. Had it all been a deception? Had he wed her not to save her, but to use the ranch as his stake? Caleb held Preston's gaze, silent, steady. But Naomi felt the distance between them stretch like barbed wire. Hale's laugh was a dry rattle before he and his men wheeled their horses, vanishing in a cloud of dust. When they were gone, Naomi turned, her voice trembling but hard as steel. "Tell me, Caleb, is it true? Did you mortgage the ranch?" Caleb did not look away. He gave a single nod. "Yes, I signed." The simple words cut her deep. The fragile trust she had begun to piece together, born from Daniel's letter, from Caleb's midnight confession of love, crumbled in an instant. She was cast back to the starting place, where every man's promise proved hollow. You swore you'd save this ranch. You swore you'd guard Daniel's land and mine. And now, her throat closed, tears burning though she refused to let them fall. Was it all a lie? Caleb stepped forward, hand outstretched to her shoulder, but she recoiled as though from fire. Naomi, listen. I didn't do this to betray you. I needed capital to— Enough! She cut him sharp, her voice like frost. I don't need your reasons. She turned and slammed the door, leaving Caleb alone in the fading dusk. That night, Naomi sat sleepless by the lamp's weary glow, staring out into the dark yard where Caleb lingered near the barn. She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the hope Daniel's letter had given, that Caleb had once borne sacrifice for friendship. But with Preston Hale's mortgage in hand, all was shrouded again in suspicion. 3 words carved themselves into her heart like stone. Betrayed once more. By morning, Dust Creek buzzed with fresh rumor. On porches and in shops whispers flew. Caleb Monroe mortgaged the widow's land, an opportunist through and through. Stares followed Naomi wherever she walked, stripping away what little dignity she still clung to. She knew the true enemy was not just the paper Hale carried, but the man himself, who had long lusted after Daniel's land, and now wielded the perfect weapon. Yet the deeper sting was Caleb's silence, his hidden dealings that left her blind and exposed. That day she worked like a shadow, mending fences, watering stock, gathering vegetables, hoping the sweat of labor might drown the storm within. But the memory of Preston's words gnawed relentless. By evening, Caleb came to her again, his voice low, steady, almost pleading. Naomi, give me time. I have a plan. I won't let Hale take this ranch. Naomi turned from him, her eyes cold. You sound just like Daniel once did, and you know well how that ended. The words struck Caleb silent. He knew then her wound could not be healed by vows alone. It would take truth, and truth proved by deeds. A new war had begun, not with bullets, but with suspicion, with rumor, and with the banker who circled like a wolf at their gate. Naomi knew this time, if she faltered, she would lose everything: land, dignity, and perhaps even her heart. Naomi stood still, her fingers clutching the hem of her cloak until they blanched white. The evening sky over Dust Creek burned red as embers, casting its glow across the golden dust that still hung in the air where Preston Hale and his men had ridden away. Hale had worn that smug glimmer of triumph in his eye, but Caleb now drew calm from his leather satchel, pulling forth papers long kept in silence. Inside the small town hall, when the emergency hearing was called, every eye turned upon Naomi. The whispers slithered sharp. The widow, they said, had finally shown her greed, marrying a swindler to hold on to land that was never hers to keep. Naomi bowed her head, and the ache rose again within her, like the day Daniel was lowered into the earth, like every time the town's cruel gossip smothered her in loneliness. Then Caleb rose, his voice steady, carrying through the chamber. Your Honor, this mortgage was not signed by me. The signature is a forgery, and I have proof that Preston Hale has manipulated land deeds for years, forcing ranchers to surrender what was rightfully theirs. He laid open Daniel's old ledger. Naomi froze, the pages stirring memories she had long avoided. Daniel's worry over debts. Yes, but never had she imagined a trap laid so deep. Caleb turned to a page marked with strange entries, payments made to a Denver apothecary. This man, Caleb declared, was paid by Hale to withhold medicine that could have eased Daniel's lungs. If the remedies had arrived in time, Daniel might have lived. Hale killed him, not with a gun, but with delay, planned and bought. A wave of clamor surged across the room. Hale sprang to his feet, spitting denials, but the evidence, letters, receipts, and the testimony of an old mail rider was more than enough. The judge's gavel struck hard. An order for Hale's arrest rang out, and the eyes that had scorned Naomi now turned upon Caleb with something different, something almost like respect. Naomi could not speak. Her heart reeled, the ropes of doubt she had bound around Caleb loosening all at once. He had not only borne Daniel's guilt, but had stood against the man who had truly broken her family. When the hearing ended, dusk lay purple over the town. Naomi stepped outside, the chill slipping through her shawl. Caleb followed, his footsteps heavy, as though burdened by years of silence. She stopped beneath an old birch at the road leading back to Dust Creek Ranch. Turning, she met his gaze. Her eyes no longer held suspicion, but fragments of sorrow, of gratitude, and of something new, fragile, and forming. "Daniel pulled you out of the dark once," she whispered, voice trembling yet clear. "And now, you've pulled me back from despair. What I never expected is that my heart would want to thank you not only with words, but with love." Caleb stood rooted, his pale eyes catching the last fire of twilight. He did not rush to her. He only inclined his head, making certain the words he'd heard were no dream. Then he answered, voice low, resolute, "Naomi, I never wished for your gratitude. I only ever wished that one day you'd see me, not as Daniel's shadow, not as a man of debts and blame, but as one who stayed for you." For a moment, the wind itself fell quiet. Naomi knew then the long nights of fear and loss were at last drawing back. After all the grief, she had found a shoulder she could trust, not because Caleb had promised, but because he had borne the weight in silence and still stood beside her. They returned to the ranch beneath the first scatter of stars. Within the cabin, the oil lamp painted warm gold upon the walls, upon the leather journal still lying open on the table. Naomi looked from the book to Caleb. She knew there were still scars between them, wounds not yet closed, trials waiting down the trail ahead. Yet for the first time since Daniel's death, she felt she was no longer alone. Caleb closed the journal, set it away. He sat across from her, and the silence between them was no longer that of strangers. In that hush, they could hear their hearts beating to the same rhythm. Naomi smiled, a small smile, weary but warm enough to soften the whole room. Caleb met it with a look of quiet tenderness, the look of a man no longer bound by debts, but beginning anew with a promise unspoken. Outside, the night wind swept over the prairie, carrying the scent of dry grass and damp earth. Above, the crescent moon hung like an unfinished word, reminding them that their story was not yet closed, but only just beginning. A chapter written not in loss, but in trust, forgiveness, and a love born from the ashes of sorrow. The tale of Naomi and Caleb was no longer only a love story. It was a testament that even in the darkest of nights, one can still find a lamp burning, if only the heart is brave enough to open If this story brings back memories of loss, yet also the quiet miracles of love and human kindness, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so we can keep these beautiful tales of the Old West alive, where love has a way of taking root even in the driest soil.